Okay, on to our next work session, State of Aggregate Resources. We have DNR with us today and the lead regulatory geologist, Ran Skov. Welcome. I think he's online.
Oh, wait, I think I'm unmuted.
Oh, yes, there you go.
Hey,
Welcome.
jackpot. All righty, let's see if I can make a video work too. Oh no, that says permission needed. Well, you might all be saved from seeing my mug on this, so I can just get into this. The important stuff is on the slides and not on my face. So, anyways, thank you all.
Great.
Thank you, Council, for inviting me to speak today about aggregate resources. Very happy to be here. I chose the picture for this slide. Actually, is there a way we can start that presentation, make that a little bit bigger?
Yes. Oh, well, we're looking at the dramatic picture right now.
Perfect. So this is a picture of Yakult Mountain. This is a super important quarry to the county. It's the largest aggregate resource reserve that's left in the county and produces by far the most aggregate within the county. It's also the last new mine that was permitted in Clark County. DNR issued this permit in 2005. Since then, no new mines have been permitted in Clark County, only revisions and expansions to existing mines, but most of the mines in the county, as we will see, are in a reclamation and closing down phase, while Yakult is in a monstrous production phase. I started with DNR in about 2008. The first time I visited this site was the fall of 2008. At that time, there were 2 stormwater ponds on site and a scraper and a bulldozer, and no mining had been done at that point. They were just setting up to start mining, and now they're well into a couple 100 feet of depth on other things. So it's like I say, it's a fairly unique mine in state to see a quarry develop this fast. And also to get to see it from, before it even really became a quarry to what has become now as a massive quarry within the county. So if we can go to the next slide and get going on the introduction portion. So just a quick few introductions. Myself, I'm Ryan Skov. I'm a licensed engineering geologist and the lead regulatory geologist for the Washington Geological Survey. As my role, I serve as the state expert on surface mine reclamation and environmental impacts of mining. I also got a few different roles within the program. I've served in the forest practice division as the forest practice science team lead, leading a group of engineering geologists that look at slope stability issues for timber sales. And then I also serve in a couple of different roles as far as regulations go. I regulate all the oil and gas drilling, geothermal drilling, and metals mining within the state. And then I serve on the Clean Energy Facility Siting Council and the Chehalis Basin Board for flood prevention that is looking at the potential to put a dam on the upper Chehalis River just outside of PL. So got a slew of things I get to do for the agency, and then one of them is coming and talking to local governments regarding interaction between the agency and the governments, how the two regulatory bodies kind of fit in with one another with the way our law is written and county codes combined. The other 2 resources that we have are John Bromley, who has actually worked at the department a little bit longer than I have. I've been here about 17 years. John's been here about 23 years now. He is the inspector for Clark County and hands down the most current and site-specific knowledge source for all of the mines in the county. And then Tricia Sears is kind of the new one to the group here. She's our geologic planning liaison. Tricia's position is actually really unique. It was actually created after we'd had some meetings with counties and realized that the information that the division put out makes perfect sense to a bunch of geologists that made these maps, but might not make perfect sense to folks who are not have that background, and understood there was some difficulty with kind of understanding how our maps or information was applicable to decision making within the county. And so we kind of dreamt up this geologic planning liaison position, and we're lucky enough to get Tricia from Oregon, where she worked in a very similar capacity. She has a planning background, but has taken some geology classes, has an interest in geology, so she's got some understanding there. But it's a great bridge between a bunch of geology scientists at the division that speak geology but not planner, And now we have someone that kind of speaks both languages that can communicate and make sure that the information we're putting out is being kind of digested and used in the intended way. Kind of thing. She's a really great resource, super easy person to work with, and is more than happy to get meetings scheduled, whatnot, to come down and help out whoever needs it. So these will all be available, of course, for everyone. I put everyone's email in there, and then as I was practicing this morning, realized I forgot the dot in between DNR and WA on my email address. But hey, click it and see who it emails to. It'll be a fun adventure for everybody. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Get into the good stuff here. Okay, so to understand aggregate resources, part of that is understanding the different types of aggregate products as well as the specifications. All those need to make. You don't need to understand what each of these specifications mean, how it's done, but what is important here is that for each product, there are multiple specifications that need to be made, and in many cases, each of these products may require materials from more than one mine. Concrete specifically, with the coarse concrete ag and the fine concrete ag, a lot of times you might have a mine that makes your coarse concrete ag, but they don't have the right amount of sand or the right kind of sand. That has to come from a different mine. And so you need multiple aggregate sources to make all these projects or products that are crucial for projects within the county, road projects, housing projects, and those kind of things all require, to some extent, part of this stuff. There's some things I didn't put on here. Jetty stone has a very, very specific specification. That's not produced at all in Clark County. There's only two mines, well, I guess 3 mines in state currently that produce jetty stone and 1 in Oregon. But for the products that would likely be used within the county, like I say, on this slide, we're really just showing there's a lot of different specifications, and in a lot of cases, just because the rock might be good for one thing doesn't mean it's good for another. You might be able to make hot mix asphalt, but you can't make base course, or vice versa, from the same rock or something like that. So that's the takeaway on this one, and I'll kind of retouch on this a little bit later as we're going through the presentation. So let's go to the next slide, which I think has multiple pieces to it. Okay, this one, is there a way we can go back or click on those pictures? What happens if we just click? That is not the one I wanted to start with. Well, so this is showing the northeast portion of the county. What I was hoping for here was I have an overview picture of the entire county that kind of shows the distribution of the sand and gravel deposits as well as the hard rock deposits on this. Let's see. Oops. There's not apparently a way for me to do that. There's the next slide.
Is that the map that you wanted to portray,
No, it looks like this
Brian?
came through as a PDF rather than a PowerPoint presentation, so I don't think my Nito animations are going to work. Let me see
Oh,
if there's
can
a
we
way.
enable him to do that?
Yeah, I was going to
We'll
say,
see
if
if
I
we
can
can
share my
enable you to
screen,
do that.
I have my presentation up right now, and I can make
Uh,
that work.
I think
Oops.
we're working on it. Oh, is there something that he can do on his end?
Here's your content webinar. What do you want to share? Text and images. I'm going to try and share my screen and see if that
Does
works.
he need to sign in another way? Okay, we're going to look for your presentation in our staff's email.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
So maybe we could bring that up.
Perfect. Yeah, this is a pretty crucial slide just to talk about kind of distribution of aggregates and kind of where areas have been built out and where potential areas could possibly be.
Yeah, that sounds like a crucial slide to look at. I was interested though in the one just in North County because that's largely my council district.
Ah, excellent. That's where I used to live. We were up off of what used to be
Ah,
County Road 16. All
can you
right.
see that?
Yeah, that's the one I'm after.
Great.
Perfect. Okay, so on this slide, and I've got a few pictures within the same slide here. This is the zoomed out version. So what I've done is I took the aggregate resource map that we had made from 2005, and I did a little bit of GIS wizardry to change the colors and then divide the sand and gravel deposits, which I have displayed here in kind of those spring green colors, and the hard rock or bedrock deposits, which are the blue colors. And you can see there's a really pretty clear southwest and northeast separation with regard to where the deposits are. That makes perfect sense with how the river's flowing here. All your sand and gravel is going to be located, marginally close to the river, where the deposition areas for that are, and then your hard rock resources are up in the mountains. This also, what I've done is made these layers a little bit transparent so we can kind of see through them to see what's underlying them. And that would help in kind of making some decisions with regard to, where potential spots might be that could be mined versus this isn't even worth looking into. So we'll dive into, I believe my first zoom in slide here is Lewis River drainage. Let's go ahead and click on the picture and see what happens.
Which picture are you wanting us to click on?
So there's, I think, 5 pictures within this one slide. They're on an animation. So every time it clicks, at least in PowerPoint, it should go to the next picture, which the next one would show a zoom in on the Lewis River drainage, which I can do from right here. I
Oh,
think everybody's
I
familiar.
think
Hey,
there
jackpot,
we
that's
go.
the one. All right, so I wanted to focus
Jackpot.
on Lewis River, mainly because I understand there's been a large effort in doing some restoration projects on the Lewis,
Yes.
to restore it to kind of a pre-settlement state type thing, but then also to show that the aggregate resources within the Lewis River are very marginal at best. So there are all these lighter color, which is like a hypothetical, based on the map layers. There might be good gravel here, is what that's telling us. There's 2 mines here that you can see with a little bit darker green. You've got the Daybreak pit here, kind of more to the west, and then the Louisville pit over here off 503 across from the park. Um, each of those pits is nearing the end of life. The Louisville pit has applied for an expansion and are working through that process now. In talking with the folks from Cadman, they're only able to make a couple products out of this. Cadman's a concrete company. They're owned by Heidelberg, which is one of the larger cement manufacturers in the world. Their whole gig is to produce concrete aggregate. And out of this site, they produce base course and finishing sand. They cannot produce concrete aggregate out of the Lewis River Terrace deposits. The gravel doesn't meet the specifications. So while this is a useful source for those other products, they can't produce their bread and butter product out of this. So to do that, they have to import rock from Oregon right now, is what they're working on to get a concrete aggregate imported in. The Tebow, or the not Tebow, the Daybreak pit over here, also nearing the end of its life. They've got probably 600ish, 5 to 600,000 yards left at that site, which for a Stordal, or I guess now Nutter site, is not that much rock. It's one of the few sand and gravel producers in the area. I'm not positive if they're able to make concrete aggregate from that. It's the same deposit as the Louisville pit. But they don't have a batch plant out there, so generally you would keep your batch plant nearer your source if you're making concrete ag. So I believe this is probably coming up with the same type of products out of that. And again, nearing the end of its life. Louisville, once the expansion goes through, will have a little bit more time left, but that's really about it. And then what you see around the Lewis River is a bunch more of those kind of marginal, lighter colored green deposits. The Tebow pit, which was kind of centered in south between the Louisville and the Daybreak pit, was in what's called the Troutdale Formation. It's a very common, fairly consolidated sand and gravel deposit within the county. It has a very high fines content and it generates a lot of rejects. So for every yard of gravel you dig, you might only get to use maybe 75% of that. The other 25% is, could be a reject product, and it's really expensive for mines to mine a site like that, especially if that rock isn't producing a whole bunch of different products. And again, with those terrace deposits, you're probably only producing 1, maybe 2 products out of the mine. So the Lewis River drainage really doesn't have that much mining potential into the future. There's just not the resources there that larger companies are going to be looking for to get into to mine. So that's one area where I feel like, the restoration project and the work that's been done is all very safe from, future mining impacts, as there's just not the resource that's going to bring companies in that are interested to develop. The other thing is, a lot of these areas are built out. You can see where Battleground is down here. There's a lot of built out there. I zoomed in on a lot of these things. I've done some additional GIS work where I took all the parcels in the county that were 20 acres or larger that touched any of the aggregate resource areas and highlighted all of them. So I could kind of see like where are clusters of bigger parcels of property that might have good resources that a company could possibly be interested in, barring any other, environmental layers, transportation layers. Like I say, I'm just looking at where the rock might be versus where a parcel large enough for a mine might be. These guys are going to be looking for probably 40 acres plus of mineable area, likely larger than 100, just kind of given the aggregate situation. And there just wasn't much out there. If it was larger than 20 acres, it's almost all farmland. There's a little bit of timberland up in the very north end of the piece where the Louisville pit is. Again, that looks like it's all silviculture, tree farm type stuff. So unlikely to have a quality gravel deposit. And again, not a lot of contiguous land that was within the resource area. Okay, can we go to the next picture, which I believe
Say,
is a zoom in on the southeast?
Ryan,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. There
Yeah.
was a proposed, and I don't know what its status is now, and I can't remember the name of it, but in Woodland,
Hmm.
uh, there was a site, and there's a little bit of woodland that is in Clark County. Do you know
Yeah.
anything about that particular site?
The only one I know out in Woodland is the Stordahl Woodland Pit. They generally have not used that one for. I keep calling it Stordahl. I believe all their stuff is owned by Nutter now, but they haven't used that one in, oh geez, 15 years. I don't know. There's a lot of deposit left there, and I'm not sure what the specifications on that one are. All of these mines are listed on the WSDOT material spec list. So you can jump onto that and see what products each mine can make or what they produce spec for. The Woodland Pit is one that has not run for a long time, so I didn't look into it significantly as far as
Yeah,
a long-term resource. But I haven't heard of any other new proposals. At least they haven't come our way yet. Generally, they will start with the county, get all the local permitting requirements, the land use requirements taken care of, so they can get what we call our SM6 form, which is the verification form that the land use will allow mining and that their subsequent use will kind of jive with the county code kind of thing. And that is signed by the county. And so generally those won't come to us until all the local permits are in place. At that point, then the counties will sign the
got it.
SM6 and we
Okay,
get our
I think
application.
our our attorney has something to say.
Thank you. This is Chris Cook, Chief Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. Chair Marshall, were you talking about the property for which a surface mining overlay application was filed a few years ago, like 2021?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, that application was withdrawn after a DS was issued, a determination of significance was issued under SEPA. And we have not heard anything from them since. So,
Okay,
Gotcha.
thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, please continue.
Perfect. Absolutely. All right, let's go to the next picture, which should be, I believe, kind of that area right there. Okay, so this is historically had been the large sand and gravel deposit for the county. It has that darker yellow cover that or color. That indicates that that's a proven sand and gravel resource, and really we get that from the map layer that indicates this is all a specific type of sand and gravel deposit, and that there was already mines that had meet specs within that, and that's all these Section 31 mines out on the east side of the area here. So kind of the far end of Mill Plain, out there by the Freiburg Pit, the English Pit, the First Street Facility, Gray Rock Resources, and I can't remember what else. There's like 5 pits out there, out by the old English Pit shooting range, whatnot. Which back in the day, I remember when the GI Joes went in on as 136th Street in Mill Plain is out in the middle of nowhere, it's just farm field. So these mines were totally out in the Tules, but you can see now it's completely developed. All of this gravel has been built over, which is not surprising. It's the easiest thing on earth to build on. It drains amazingly well. All you got to do is knock the soil off it and build a house. There's not a lot of subgrade preparation that's needed for these gravels. So for builders, this stuff is a dream. And these pits for historically had massive reserves. I mean, these were millions of yards of gravel that helped all this development. Unfortunately, there wasn't any of this gravel kind of set aside for future use, and this would have been looking 20, 25 years into the future kind of thing that these would have had to have been preserved, which would have been a heck of a challenge to do for that long. But anyway, so these guys are fairly well dried up. The Section 31 mines. Hey, perfect. No, actually, go to that next slide. That works out perfect. The Section 31 mines, which you can see here in the little cluster, kind of in that lower good gravel area, those are no longer producing aggregate. They're all in a reclamation phase, as is the 117th Street pit, which is the other pit kind of north of those in that same color. What I did here was I took all of our active permits, and those are the green dots, and I put them on the map to kind of illustrate where these mines are spatially within the county, within the gravel deposits, as well as what ones are producing and what ones are not. On this picture, the only producing mines out here are the Fazio pit, which is the one on the far west, out by the river. He produces about 50,000 tons of sand. He only makes finishing sand out there a year, and that doesn't change. He just gets a deposit from the Corps, and that's what he gets. And then the Spotted Deer mine, which is the far northeast mine up in kind of that medium color blue. That's a DNR property. There's only about 800,000 yards, maybe 700,000 yards left in the mine. And we don't lease that out as a, like we did at like Livingston, where Sorrel was at, where they were producing a whole bunch every year. Spotted Deer produces just a little bit of aggregate. So, and even then doesn't have a massive resource, but those are the only two producing mines that we have here. The other one up on the north end is a Finn Hill site. That is a county public works site. So the material that come out of there would only be used for public works. But if I remember right, Finn Hill is no longer producing, and that is in a reclamation phase. The two Livingston Mountain sites are both shut down, and those are both in reclamation phases. And the Washougal pit in the far southeast corner is still working on their gorge permitting requirements before they could begin operating again. And again, not another massive resource there. They've got maybe 3, possibly 400,000 yards of gravel left in that site, and then they're going to be exhausted. So that's, figure they're producing 100,000 a year out of that pit. You've only got about 3-4 years of gravel coming out of that site. And after that point, your sand and gravel resources in the south end of the county are exhausted. Looking in the other areas where potential could exist for gravel resources, most of it's fairly built out. There's a lot of agricultural land that'd be difficult to convert to aggregate land. And again, from conversations I've had with folks in industry and consultants in the area, the drilling and the exploration they've done in here hasn't shown that there's a good quality gravel resource that they would want to pursue for permitting. So bit of a tough situation in the south end of the county, but go ahead and click on the next slide. I think that brings us up to the north end of the county. There we go. Okay, so now we're in the northeast side of the county. We're up here, kind of Shalatchi area. You can see if you know where to look and what to look for, I suppose. The mines up here that we can see, obviously, Yakult Mountain, super important mine with a monstrous reserve. There are well over 30 million tons of rock remaining at Yakult Mountain. So that's a good deal for the county, and that you got one source that has a large reserve left. It is fairly distal from the market, though, and I'm sure you're all aware of the transportation impacts that has brought to the neighbors of that site. The other two sites that are up here are both operating. One is the Maple Pit, which is a quarry run by Clark County Public Works. That is the kind of the north, let's say, west of the 3 green dots. That's only to be used for public works projects. So they're not feeding people's driveways, houses, foundations, those kind of things. That's only public works at the county run deal. And then Courtney Rock is the other one. Courtney Rock has a small reserve left. They don't produce a massive amount of material, and generally only serve kind of that north end of the market. They generally are not running rock all the way from there into Vancouver area. And outside of that, that's about it for mines up here. There's been some investigation in the Shalatchi Bluff area by Granite and others to look into potential site there, with the hope of the PVJR railroad coming online and being able to transport the material into the market via rail to lighten the burden on the roads out there. But in the drilling that they've done and talking with the representatives from Granite, they said the rock was really spotty. It didn't meet hot mix asphalt specifications, which is, for granted, their bread and butter. They're an asphalt company, so they need their rock to meet HMA spec, and some of it did, a lot of it didn't. But in what he was talking about, it sounded like it was kind of a tough deposit. And then again, the permitting issues with the determination of significance with regard to the land use decision on that makes it difficult for companies to want to get into and look into permitting that. The other deal this slide shows is the remaining resources. They look really good. They got quite a bit of this kind of medium color blue, which is we call it hypothetical reserve. And that's like there might be a forest practice pit in that kind of deal. So they're making forest roads on it, and it probably is good rock, but it hasn't been tested for specification for like a WSDOT job or something like that, which is kind of the bread and butter for these mine sites. And then the light colored stuff is just based on geologic mapping. This unit should have these qualities, but there hasn't been any testing, so we don't know for sure. And what this is showing is a lot of that light colored stuff where the good rock, could possibly be, is also way up in the hills. So you're looking at a fairly tough transport situation, getting the rock from their source back down into market, just kind of given the length and the condition of those roads and the amount of maintenance that forest roads serving an aggregate mine require are fairly high, especially if any of these, if they've got stream crossings and that kind of stuff, where they could be contributing to sediment to a fish bearing stream. They've got a lot of mitigation that they got to do around those. So each one of those things is a cost that makes these sites harder for mines to want to look into for permitting. And again, the exploration that I have talked with the Cadman folks and the Stordahl and the Granite folks about is they hadn't found anything that was of like amazing quality. Yakult Mountain was kind of an outlier here when talking with Kimball Stordahl about that. He drilled down to 400 feet at Yakult, and for the last 200 feet, he said he pulled out 4-foot sticks out of the core, and that relates to the rock quality. If you can pull out a 4-foot long stick, your rock core is 4 feet long when you're coring rock. So if you get a solid 4-foot chunk of rock out of that thing, that's called 100% RQD, rock quality dimension. And that has to do with how many times the rock breaks over that 4 feet and kind of what your longest section of rock is within a 4-foot section. At 100%, you have no fractures, and that indicates you have a really good high quality rock product. It's pretty rare to get a few barrels of that, but to get 200 feet of it is really, really rare. So Yakult Mountain's a great, very consistent deposit, and that's the difference between it and a lot of these other rock deposits out here. Is a lot of these other ones are very inconsistent with their rock quality. So you might get really good rock for 10, 20 feet of your drilling, and then kind of get into some marginal rock that you're not sure what you're going to do with. And again, that's really difficult for mines to want to look at for permitting if they don't know how much waste product they might generate or how much rock that's not going to meet specification that they can't sell or do anything with that they need to still handle and whatnot. So that's the difficulty up here is largely transportation related. Finding the quality deposits, there's stuff there, less population and more areas that it could be designated as large mineral lands, but more inconsistent rock quality is what I found out in that area. So I think now we get to go to the next slide. Hey, jackpot. Okay, so these two excerpts actually came from a report written by geologist Eric Staley, who formerly worked for NV5 and now has started his own company. These were paid for by industry, but it was done to show, one, where the active mines are within the county and kind of what the reserve situation looks like as time goes on here. And really what I wanted to focus on here was just the geographic distribution of the mines. On the picture to the left, all the red mines are active. So the red little squares on the kind of periphery of the county are all of the active mines. All the gray colored ones are in reclamation phase. So you can see where your major market is within the county is all in reclamation phase. So all of your aggregate is coming in from the outskirts of the county, having to be brought into market. So you've got a transportation issue with regard to where your aggregate's coming from. And then also a supply issue in that most of these mines that are still operating are out in the kind of the bedrock resource area. Your sand and gravel deposits are really starting to thin out within the county. Just, that's like I say, the easy land to build on and the more attractive land to build on. So that's where the build out occurs. In the picture on the right, a little bit of difference, what he did between 21 and 24. I think if you click, there might be an animation that pops up with a couple of little ovals that circle the Livingston Mountain area. Yes. And then one more click should circle, I think, the Washougal pit. So you can see on the red circle here, Livingston Mountain, the Tower Rock side has now shut down, and that is in a reclamation phase. And then also wanted to point out Washougal Pit could be an aggregate source, a sand and gravel source for a short period. But again, has some permitting challenges that they need to get taken care of before they can get going. And then the other mines, again, all your rock resources are very high north end of the county. So transportation has become an issue. He also included in the 24 image all these pink dots, or pink squares, I should say. Down, you can see most of them on the Oregon side. There's one on the Vancouver side. Those are your aggregate ports. And so all your aggregate, both loadout and unloading terminals, are located mainly on the Oregon side. So even when barging material comes in, almost all of it's going to get barged into the Oregon and still have to get transported across the bridge back into town, other than the one facility that's just west of town there, just north or just south of Vancouver Lake. That I think is pretty telling. And that there's this many barge facilities already. The Portland market is largely a barge in market. With the Columbia River, Clark County has a very unique opportunity that a lot of counties don't, and that barging is a viable potential, and it's already occurring in the area. So the setup exists there. The barge terminals exist. If anything, I would say Clark County could use maybe one more towards the east side of the county to help serve the that portion, but that likely is going to be the direction that sand and gravel comes into the county into the future. In talking with other operators, Cowlitz County and Skamania County have very limited sand and gravel resource deposits that are mineable, and the transportation again gets pretty excessive. Barging isn't cheap. The aggregate price will increase with barging, but for lack of a different solution, the solutions are getting pretty slim with regard to sand and gravel specifically within Clark County. So barging should be something that is likely seriously looked into the future, just because there's not the large, high quality gravel deposits that exist that haven't already been built out, type of thing. So I think with that, we can move on to the next one, which I think is my next to last slide. Yeah. So, with all this, it's very clear that there is really no easy solution or decision to be made when it comes to aggregate resources in Clark County. The sand and gravel resources, they're very, very sparse. They're not exhausted yet, and there are probably still some smaller pockets, little 20 acre, 40 acre pockets where smaller mines could get developed. And produce some resource products, but they're unlikely to produce products that are feeding all of those specifications to meet your coarse and your fine concrete ag and that kind of thing. So sand and gravel is definitely going to be the challenge for Clark County into the future. The hard rock resources actually look pretty good. You've got expansive amounts of them. They're well spread across kind of the northeast end of the county. And even though the exploration hasn't maybe said there's an amazing hot mix asphalt rock that someone's found, they'll still produce a lot of other products that can then feed and supplement other mines in the area and extend the resources in the area. So that one's difficult though in the transportation and environmental challenges. And the environmental challenges really relate to transportation out of the woods. With those things, gravel roads degrade fairly quickly under the weight of aggregate trucks. So there is a large upkeep on the roads that is a cost to the mines, as well as just the long transport distance. After 25-mile radius outside of a mine, the cost of aggregate generally will double every 5 miles. So if you're having to transport 40 miles away, rather than selling aggregate for $10 a ton, you're probably selling it for 30 or 40 bucks a ton, just because of the cost associated with getting that aggregate to market. It's very heavy product, so transportation is by far the most expensive piece of hauling rock. Producing it's relatively cheap. If you have your own dump truck, you can go to the mine and buy $10 a ton aggregate. But if you got to pay for that dump truck, you're buying a $400, $500 load of rock to come out to your place for 10 yards. So the main portion of the money goes to transportation. So having mines local to projects, local to their markets, is really important. And so that's the tough part with the hard rock is it's nice in that you're not having to mine around neighbors and disrupting neighbors and their piece of life, but you're also increasing cost the farther those mines are put away, or the more environmental challenges that are involved in permitting a mine site. So my thoughts were, Port District is likely going to be the future for sand and gravel into the county, unless rail magically comes online. But even the rail situation, and talking to the PDJR guys, at very best, they're thinking maybe 10 years to develop their switching yard out there. And then I would think it would probably be 5 to 10 years to develop offload terminals that they would have to do. And I don't know, with the rail permitting, that's kind of a spider web of weird CFR stuff that you get to deal with, but nothing would happen really quick off that rail. So it is an alternate transport and it would keep trucks off the road is the benefit. But I also understand that there's a large outcry from the Shalashi neighbors out there that really don't want a aggregate terminal and rail running right in their backyard. Completely understand that. But it's a small area impact for potentially a large county benefit. So it's, again, might be viable, but you still have to have the resources to get to it. And it still has to, have the infrastructure that it needs to get that material into the market. So definitely tough situations. And no real clear situation or no real clear solution that I was able to oh, hey, I found the magic honey hole of aggregate within the county kind of thing is few and far between out there. Like I say, small pits possibly, but I think the future for sand and gravel in the county is likely going to have to be imported. Barge seems the most logical given the proximity to the Columbia there. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have. I have my GIS open and can share my screen with the parcels highlighted to thrill and amaze you all with little purple squares all over the county. But yeah, like I say, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. And if you have any questions, let's get to them.
Great. Thank you very much. It's very informative, helpful overview for us. So we do have some questions. Go ahead, Councillor Little.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for this information. Really appreciate your perspective since you lived there and know so much about our area. In early June, I had a list of 6 questions that I sent to internally to Public Works to see if they had some answers, and I haven't had any answers yet. You may have seen these questions, but if not, I was going to summarize them in 3 questions and see if you can help us answer any of those more completely than you already have.
Mhm.
And then if not, I think we might want to have another session. And if you'd be willing to give your time, we'd love to have you back if that's what the council wants. But I'd probably also want to have Public Works here as well as maybe some representatives from the industry, because price is obviously so important to moving things forward. So,
Mhm.
question number, I'll go through the 3 questions and just let me know if there's anything more you can provide on any of those. So the first one is, how much aggregate does Clark County use? Because I'm trying to think of cost to us. And what is the average cost to us of locally sourced truck aggregate, provided by truck versus these other forms of transportation? Particularly, I'm thinking about barged, and then also, trucking it in from Oregon or bringing it in from rail. So that's first question. Just would like to get some numbers on prices and what kind of savings we would get. And so the second one is, if there were going to be major savings from getting more locally sourced aggregate by truck, I know you covered this a little bit, but what are the potential local sources that we could promote, and what are the barriers? I know you identified some places, you tried to put some larger lot overlays, but I'd like to drill down a little bit more on that and try to figure out what locally sourced areas we can promote, especially if there are savings to us and the industry. And then finally, I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about chip seal rock. I don't know much about it, but I heard it's the type of rock there is a limiting factor for us. And I just want to know if we have any local sources right now that do not require barging. So
Gotcha.
I know that's a lot.
All right, no, that works perfect. So, as far as how much is used, one of those NV5 reports had a couple of numbers they threw out. One of them was a calculation that DNR uses on our aggregate resource maps, which I believe is higher than reality kind of dictates it. That one came out to something like the county's use was like 5.1 million tons per annual. That seems really, really high for Clark County for me. With the population, generally aggregate uses is tied right to your population. Each person on average, I think, uses like 2,000 tons of aggregate per year, and that has to do with the road work and development within a county or something like that. So, as population grows, you need more homes, you need more roads to serve them, yada yada. So your aggregate needs grow. Um, in talking with operators and folks around the county, he came up with a usage that seemed a little bit more realistic, about 1.4 million per year. That to me seems a lot more kind of jiving with the size of the county, the amount of the road network that you have, the type of road network you have, as well as the population. So I would guess you're probably in that 1.5 million ish, maybe up to 2 million tons per year. Kind of thing as far as usage goes. And now as far as cost breakdown, currently truck is your sole, essentially the sole gig. I don't know exactly what they're charging for trucks right now. That's going to be based on the truck trip. So your aggregate per ton is about maybe $15 per ton, depending on the type of you're making. But let's just say you're buying like a 5/8 clean or something like that you'd be using for a base course. You'd be probably paying about 15 to $20 a ton for the rock, and then transportation. Transportation is generally set at about $135 per hour, and they just figure an average speed of like 50 miles an hour, no, 35 miles an hour is your average speed in the dump trucks, and then just do your mileage, and that gives you your trucking cost ballparked. So say on a 20-mile haul or something like that, you're probably paying about $400 a truckload for that rock if they're just trucking it right from the quarry that is in the county right to that site. Now, if they have to barge that into Oregon and then put it on a truck in Oregon and haul that in, your trucking distance is increased, as well as now you have a barging cost that's associated with it. And in talking with barging operators, it is not a cheap setup to open or operate a barging facility. There's a lot of permitting, there's a lot of environmental mitigation that needs to be done and maintained. So they have a fairly high cost. So that barging adds a fairly substantial cost. That barge truck combo probably gets close to doubling the cost of that aggregate, excuse me. Rail actually can be really cheap. Per ton, rail is the cheapest way to move materials on land. But then you're kind of bound by how proximal that rail line is, again, to your project, and what kind of facilities the rail has available to it. Does it have offload and onload facilities, or is it something different? A lot of rail sites will have kind of a spur where they can load out their trail or load out their cars and then connect to the main line and haul that back into market. So rail generally is going to be on par with trucks if it already exists. If the infrastructure has to be built in, there's going to be costs associated with that. That's going to get then turned and moved on to the consumer. Railing into a new system is probably going to be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 times what the truck cost is. A barge solely material, just again because of the cost of the barging, the facilities, the cost of moving the barge up or down river, and that makes a big difference whether they're pushing it up from the mouth or they're floating it down from, say, Dalesport or something. Barging, I would say anywhere between 3 to up to 5 times the cost in a tough situation. If they had to barge from, say, Puget Sound. We have a few barging facilities with large resources up in the Sound area. Feasibly, they could stack it on a barge, come down around the end of the state and push it up the river to get to you. That would be closer to probably 5 times the current cost. So you'd be looking about $2,000 per 10 yards. So that equates down to about $200 a yard for your gravel. It gets obscenely expensive. That's why the localization of the rock sources is so important. And that goes into the next question. As far as like local areas, there are quite a few sand and gravel areas that I saw that were, again, kind of smaller, 20 acres, maybe you got a couple of 10-acre parcels that might connect or something like that to make some smaller resources. Potentially kind of out by Lacamas Lake up north, there's a couple of water ski ponds out there, but northeast of those water ski ponds, seemed like there was some open land that had some potential. Maybe some of the Lewis River terrace gravels, again, more distal from the river, within that same gravel deposit as it's mapped, though, it might have potential. They're currently used for forestry. Those look like they were some maybes. and then just kind of random spots, kind of scattered throughout the southeast portion of the county in the sand and gravel area. Again, you might have some of these smaller pits that are, have a viable resource. They make a few products. They're just going to be short lived or not producing very much. It might be somebody's retirement hobby that they always wanted to drive a front end loader or something like that, and they are going to mine 10 acres with it. But largely, you would want to look for, just because of the cost of permitting. A reclamation plan might cost somebody between 30 and 50,000 bucks. To spend that for a 10-acre site that they're hoping to make a couple $100,000 on is going to be pretty tough. So they're going to need to have enough land to kind of recoup the cost of all their permitting, all the setup fees and whatnot of getting these things going before they start making a dime out of these things. So you're going to be looking, I'd say, a minimum of a 20-acre block to do that, which, again, they're out there, they exist. The tough part is finding the quality gravel that is there, just kind of given the lack of materials testing that has occurred out in a lot of the sand and gravel area. But that's where discussions with industry have been really valuable to me. Talking with consultants, talking with people in the industry, they're looking to find material to serve the market. The industry they're there to get you guys these products that you need. They want to supply the products you need, but they also need the land to mine, and they need the quality rock to mine out. Just putting aggregate resources in distal areas that are tough to access, or where there's not quality gravels, checks the box for GMA, but it doesn't help the county long run with as far as materials acquisition. So that's really the tough part. But again, the industry is crazy knowledgeable, and their intent is just to provide a product that is needed in the market. And so, information from them I consistently have taken that as gospel on their word. They have no reason to blow smoke up my stuff about where good gravel is and where good gravel isn't. And like I say, I've been doing this for 17 years and consistently have been very impressed with the professionalism of how these folks do their job, and how they want to serve the market, and they're not just out there to make a quick buck and hose anybody over. They're there to serve a need in their communities that they live in. And so, when they're saying, hey, we've got a good resource over here type of thing, then I absolutely listen to them, because again, they're not going to spend the money to mine something that's not making spec, not meeting the need of the community that they're serving. So they're a great resource for materials testing and spec, and really finding out about what areas might be potential, because they've probably looked into a lot of these areas. I was surprised at how much drilling Cadman had done out in the area. I'm in talking with their geologist, who is their national guy, but I've worked with him since I started here. It was amazing. I think Kurt's drilled probably 20 different spots between western Skamania and Clark County, just looking for new rock, and not being real successful in finding any, or finding smaller deposits that might be viable. But again, it was a smaller area, and so they're on the fence about whether or not they're going to permit, kind of a thing. But they're there. They're just really few and far between. And like I said, we don't have a amount of information on material spec testing. And that's really where the problem lies, is not having that little bit of information is the tough part. But again,
Thank you,
and that
Ryan.
could be something that we kind of drill into more in a future meeting, possibly.
Okay, that's very complete. Thank you. But one last question was about chip seal rock, and
Yeah.
could you tell a little bit more about the application and the type of rock needed, and if we have any locally?
Yeah. So chip seal rock can actually come from a variety of sources. It can come from a hard rock source or a round rock source. A lot of times it actually comes from hard rock. The difficulty with chip seal, generally, you got to crush to a 3/8, and crushing a quarry rock all the way down to 3/8 is just long and expensive. That's a lot of processing that rock has to go through. That's going to fall through a jaw crusher, onto a conveyor, into a cone crusher, back onto a conveyor, and then probably are in 2 more cone crushers to get down to 3/8. So that rock has to get crushed 3 to 4 times to get to the spec that it needs to get down to chip seal size. At that point, then it's just hot mix asphalt product is laid down, and then the chip seal rock is just placed on top of and overrolled. But the nice thing about it is it does do a great job of kind of extending the lifespan of the wear surface of roads. But like say, it's hard to make for quarries because of the amount of processing. It's way easier for a quarry that's making, when they blast, the rock is generally between 4 and 8 inches in diameter. That's your most efficient part of your crushing, is the blast. If you can crunch it down to a 4 to 8 rock, that's a pretty good blast. But then that 4 to 8 rock goes through the jaw, that knocks it down to about probably a 2-inch rock, and then it falls through the first cone. That brings it down to 3/8. Second cone will bring it down to 5/8, and then the third cone might take 5/8 to 3/8, kind of a thing. But it's so much processing. Whereas to make 5/8 rock, which is a very common product, you run it through the jaw, you run it through one crusher or one cone crusher, and you have your product. So there's much less processing time, and all those processing things that steel wears. So there's wear parts that are expensive and whatnot. So the difficulty with chip seal from quarries is getting it to the specification size. From sand and gravel deposits, it's a little bit easier if you have, good crushed sand rock. Like Louisville could probably make chip seal rock. I don't know if it's going to hit the absorption, but generally it does. That's not as big a problem as the concrete. With the alkali silica reactivity test, the asphalt doesn't have the same absorption problems. So, like say, chip seal is more because it's a surfacing rock. It needs to have a high, what they call LA abrasion or degradation. Those are two different kind of wear tests on how much the rock wears over time as it's spun in a cylinder, with or without water, kind of a thing. But that really goes to say, how long is my seal going to last? Am I going to lay this down and it's going to wear out in a year, or are we going to lay this down and we're good for 5 years, kind of thing. So again, the rock has to be fairly hard, fairly durable, but then also crushed to such a small little particle size, it makes it hard for a mine to produce that product at a reasonable cost.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think there's some other questions. Councillor Young?
Yes, and bear with me because I have a number of them. I appreciate your enthusiasm. It's so clear and evident that you love what you do. That passion rubs off. So I appreciate you being here today. The first question I'd like to ask is, do you know what is the county's responsibility under the Gross Management Act as far as aggregate?
Gotcha. So the undergrowth management, the counties are charged with preserving aggregate resources of long-term and economic, significance. So essentially, you need to set aside good gravel resources that are there for, I believe it's the next 20 years. So you look at your usage, you look at, how much tons do we have currently permitted in county, and how much are we going to need for the next 20 years, and then hopefully are able to find those sources and get those set up. What growth management doesn't take into account is, like I was talking about earlier, some of the transportation and environmental challenges. It's pretty easy for, I was up in Clallam County doing this a while back. They have a massive crescent basalt deposit. So their map looks like it's a great big red stripe right across the majority of the county, and that red stripe indicates that's a volcanic rock. And in some cases, they have mines within that crescent basalt. So the way the county looked at it was like, we've got this great big huge strip of great rock. We can put mines anywhere in it. When in fact, the crescent basalt specifically has very little pods of good rock and then a sea of really junk rock. And so finding that large resource within a mapped area is really tough to say, like, yeah, this is a good site for the next 20 years, just solely based on the color it is on the map or something like that, or just how distal it is for market. It's pretty easy to cite places that are maybe less likely to be mined or less likely to upset neighbors or whatnot, that are way off in the distal portions of the county or in areas that are harder to access or something. But like say, it might satisfy the GMA requirements, because GMA doesn't take into account the realisticness of whether or not that site could be mined. It just says, have you set aside this aggregate resource by putting a mineral resource overlay or MRL over it, to kind of preserve that rock for the way that GMA intended, so you have your aggregate resources into the future. What it doesn't do is like look at the feasibility of like, okay, well, if someone were to permit this area, how would they go about doing that? What environmental challenges might there be? And would that even be something that someone would look into permitting, or is the resource even there? It looks good on the map, but maybe it doesn't meet all the specifications. So the tough one is, like say, meeting the GMA requirements, but then also meeting those requirements as they're intended to serve the counties, and that you're preserving good, high quality rock resources for the future that are, not built out, not, I guess you can convert agricultural lands, but GMA reads very, very similar with agricultural lands as it does with the aggregate resource lands. Both of those of long-term economic significance are meant to be preserved. So in most cases, converting agricultural land to aggregate resource land can be fairly difficult. It's done. Whatcom County, I spoke with Whatcom County about this about a decade ago, just because they have such a large agricultural sector with all the berry land up there, but it's underlain by phenomenal gravel resources. But the farmers are obviously nervous about converting their berry land that's producing great raspberries right now to gravel extraction for 10-15 years, and then how is that agricultural land going to get restored and then be as productive as it was before the mining came across? So it's possible. It takes a little bit more planning from the mines to do it, but it's absolutely a viable way to kind of get dual usage out of land. But like I say, it just requires a little bit more planning and operational preciseness, I will say, on the part of the mines.
Okay, and then kind of adding to this, I know that a lot, just even from your presentation, a lot of aggregate is imported into the county. I'm sure there's some exporting as well, but are we a net importer, and how dramatic of a net importer are we?
Gotcha. For sand and gravel, yeah, you're absolutely a net importer. And will likely have to continue to be that way, just because, like I was talking about with the different specifications, the Louisville pit will have a decent reserve here once this expansion is approved, but that reserve is only going to make a couple different products. It'll make a nice base course and it'll make a nice finishing sand, but they can't make concrete aggregate out of it. So for concrete aggregate, they got to import all of that over from the Oregon side. And either do the barge truck combo or just barge it straight to the Vancouver port and access it from there. But yeah, for sand and gravel, you're definitely a net importer. Hard rock resources, you could be an exporter. Yakult Mountain is a phenomenal resource, but right now it also provides about 80+% of the rock to the county. So you're very reliant on that one mine. And right now, in talking with Bo a couple of weeks ago, Stordahl, all the rock from that is still serving Clark County. They're not exporting any. They're actually looking to import from Cowlitz County to supplement. But again, the Cowlitz County resources are their hard rock resources are not as good quality as the Yakult Mountain resource, and gravel resources in Cowlitz are not nearly expansive enough to feed both Cowlitz County and then export into Clark County market.
Thank you. And then, from my understanding, the process of identifying resource land, zoning it or with an overlay, and then permitting, and then a mine actually open can often be a decade or two. So when we make changes here, it takes a long time for those changes to be felt in the county. My question is, given the current geography, I'll say the layout of the land here in the county, given that whatever we could change today wouldn't happen for 20 years, what do we look like in the future? It sounds to me like we're not developing the capacity that needs to be there to supply the county currently today, and that it's going to increasingly diminish over time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, without new mines coming online, absolutely. And like you're spot on with your timelines there. From start of land use planning to mine becoming operational, generally I will tell folks about a decade. You might get somebody on the absolute cruise missile path or something like that they can get it done in 5 or 6 years kind of thing. But these are absolutely multi-year processes to get these things up and running. Between the environmental review, the public comment periods and all that stuff, and then just all the different studies and whatnot needed for permitting, they're fairly substantial undertakings. So, the sooner these things can become, set up within the county to get the land use portion of it tackled, the sooner the subsequent pieces can start getting going. But it's definitely going to be a challenge moving into the future, given population growth is unlikely to diminish or flatline type of thing, and you've got mines that are kind of going the opposite direction. Your population is increasing, and your mine population, the number of active mines, is decreasing in the county. So I would say you're at a point now where it's fairly imperative to seek out, find, and designate those good resource areas that are as near to market as possible, so that, in 10 years, as mine X is coming offline, you've got mine Y coming online, and can again kind of supplement for them and trade out. If not that, then it's just going to then go to barge capacity, and how many barges can you bring in per week, per whatever, and feed an increasing need there, just because your sand and gravel resources are unlikely to get a large expansion into the future. Like I was saying earlier, maybe some smaller sites, but unlikely to find it that big, like 150 acre mega mine. The Section 31 mines in the days of these monstrous gravel deposits that'll make just about every spec are probably about done in Clark County with regard to where you could extract from, type of thing. The gravel resources that I think are left are likely to be more specific to a few different products, but not have that large range of, sure, what do you want, we'll make it, kind of a thing. So definitely going to be a challenge, but not insurmountable by any means.
Great. So, the outlook is such that we're going to be looking at continually more expensive aggregate for probably at least the next decade. What can we do to, reverse that trend? And, we don't want to be an exporter either, but I think that the Growth Management Act intends that each county supply its own aggregate, and that we're not extracting resources from outside, making it somebody else's problem, essentially. So what do we need to do in order to reverse this trend, which nobody will see the fruits of that until long past, probably likely all of us are gone off of this council? But what do we need to do to make sure that we're supplying the county properly over the next few decades?
Yeah. Like I spoke earlier, having meetings with industry and talking to them about where they've found resources, and where potential resources could be, just kind of past mining or word of mouth, whatever. These guys talk to each other all the time. They have a really solid idea as to where good gravel might exist and where it doesn't, and that's true for every miner in every county across the state. That's generally the source I go to when I'm giving these talks. Is I'll talk to a few of the larger companies and a few of the smaller companies within the county, just to see, have you been looking in different areas? Where is, are there potential areas around you, or is it this or that? What are the challenges in these areas, kind of a thing. But they've got a great handle on where the gravel might be to feed the market that they want to feed. So, having that meeting maybe in the future where you've got industry input to say, yeah, actually, there could be some resources over here, there could be some resources over there, type of thing, would be really helpful, I think, in also making those determinations. And then I think also messaging to the public when you're making those determinations, that putting an MRO or a mineral resource overlay or mineral resource land designation on a parcel does not necessarily mean that it will turn into a mine. In many cases, MRL can sit there forever. And it never gets developed. Either it's, for one reason or another, it's, too small a parcel, it's too distal, it doesn't have the right kind of rock in it. It doesn't automatically mean that property is going to be mined, but it means it could be. And it can also reflect a potential increase in the property value, in that, if a mine was to approach a landowner and say, hey, we would love to, mine your property here. We see you're living on it, but we're happy to buy your house and your property for double market value, or something like that, because the aggregate company is no longer just looking at the surface and what they can do on the surface. They're looking at the value of the gravel beneath it. And so it can help some of the property values with regard to buyouts, kind of a thing. It's not going to change anybody's home value by putting the MRO on it. But it certainly could be, beneficial to the property owner if a mine was to go that direction. Because again, it's now they're buying resource, not just a flat piece of land, kind of deal.
So the areas that you're talking about that are being identified to have good rock, are those areas that currently have an overlay on them, or are they not?
Most of them do not. Most of the overlay areas currently, there's a few, I think, kind of east of Vennersburg, outside of Battleground there, kind of up in the hills or whatnot, kind of not on Silver Star, but nearing Silver Star area. Transportation to those was really difficult. Also, there was one on a piece of hard rock down in kind of the northwest portion of the county. There's no current roads to that piece of rock, and it's 100% surrounded in wetlands. And so, like, things like that, where they're designated, but they're designated a long ways away, are really difficult for mines to want to permit, or that might not even be possible to permit. Generally, if an EIS or a DS is given as a threshold determination on SEPA, unless it's some kind of massive world-class gravel deposit, the Cal Portland DuPont mine is in the top 3 producing mines in the nation every year. It's right here in state. It feeds the Seattle market. They've got a barge facility. I think on a low year, they might mine like 5 million tons out of the site. They will do an EIS for a site that big. It's a 260 acre property. Their expansions they're working on right now is like 150 acres, and it has 24 million yards of gravel in it. That's worth doing an EIS for. A 20 acre parcel that has 200,000 yards absolutely will not pay for an EIS. And so that's going to be the difficulty. And when you're looking for these things, there's a lot of layers. And when Trisha gives her talks, she talks about this as far as like how aggregate planning incorporates our data as well as a bunch of other stuff to make these decisions. Environmental data, transportation data, housing data, yada yada, everything you can kind of throw in there to make those decisions as far as where could this material be, and then what could be useful for designation. But the big issues now that I see are a lot of lands that might be potential are not currently designated as MRO. So there's that extra step, and again time in taking that through the designation process, getting that approved, and then garnering the interest in industry to develop those sites as needed.
So along with that, we're currently undergoing in the county, we're undergoing an agricultural land study. So is there a mineral land study? What can we do to identify those sources and look at the potential for adding overlays?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Like say, first off, I would talk to industry to see if they have any information on them, because a lot of times they may have some information that they're willing to hand over to help the county make a determination, and they would likely be doing that for free. Second, in other counties, I know Thurston County actually paid for they did an aggregate resource study where essentially like our aggregate resource mapping, it was slightly different, in that it did a little bit more testing of specific areas, but that is something that could be useful in doing a little bit of aggregate testing in areas, or having a consultant do some kind of a study kind of a thing where they're looking into these deals. They're getting all that information. Like say WSDOT's drilled a bunch of holes around the state looking for good rock or whatnot. So there's some information available. Others is going to be you got to go out and grab it kind of a thing. And drilling is expensive. That's the other problem is generally those projects within a county budget or a state budget for that matter are not going to allow for a large amount of drilling. Industry generally will do the majority of the drilling for testing and whatnot on these sites. The designations largely in other counties are made just off the maps or kind of anecdotal data that they were able to garner from their public works, WSDOT, industry, that kind of thing, as far as no good rock over here, but there is some deposits in this general vicinity that could be of use or something like that. So again, it wouldn't be a bad deal if there's already an agricultural land study going through, an aggregate lands like mineral resource land study that looks into quality of deposits in specific areas of interest would be a really useful thing, I think, for the county to help planning, specifically with sand and gravel in mind.
Okay, and the way I look at this is the sooner we identify those spaces and properly overlay them, the less impact to the community in the future. It's one thing, when nobody lives there, to put an overlay in. It's a whole different story when things start changing, people start moving outward over time. And because we're talking about decades here, we're not talking about just the next few years. We're talking a long time into the future.
Absolutely.
But I was also curious with the same subject. From my understanding, in 2014, the county had some land that were identified that were in the overlay that were removed. Do you have a real quick history on that?
I don't have much history on that. I know there was some lands that had come out. I couldn't say what ones those were specifically. I've been looking at the current resource map to kind of look at what's available now as far as designation, and are there challenges for the areas that are designated, and are there potential areas that are not included that could be of potential future benefit. And that was, my first thought instantly before I spoke with Granite was, the Shalachie Bluff area seemed like a good potential long-term source with the, proximity to rail, the proximity to 503. There's transportation issues are not as bad there as they are in some of the areas that are, more up into the forestry side of things. But then in talking with Granite, our contact down there, James, did quite a bit of drilling and was again finding a lot of just kind of weird sporadic rock. It was maybe okay in some areas and then certainly less than okay in others, but it was not the like super high quality, hey, we've just found the holy grail of hot mix asphalt rock in Clark County that they were hoping for. So it's definitely a tough situation with regard to being able to find those specific pockets.
Great. And again, I appreciate you for all the information that you provided. The one thing that I've noted, though, is that the discussion has been centered around dollars and cents. It's expensive to do this, it's expensive to do that. One of the things that I think that we should be looking at is climate impacts as well, because those are significantly affected, I'm assuming, by location of mine and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, my suggestion would be for, I want to continue this conversation, and I'd like for us eventually to discuss potentially forming a task force similar to what we're discussing with the other resource lands, with the timberlands, forest lands, to kind of go through this. And I'd want to make sure that we had industry experts, but I'd also want to make sure that we have a sizable component of people that are interested in protecting and the integrity of our environment involved in that process, so it can be a joint venture to identify the places that are ideal for the rock, but also minimizing the environmental impact as much as possible. So thank you again for coming. Those are all my questions and comments at this time.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Ryan. We can actually see you now. I don't know if you were aware of that.
Hey, all right. Camera's working. Well, sorry about
Good.
your guys' luck.
Yeah. No problem at all. I have a few questions. I'm curious about the aggregate ports and where their sources are. Where is that rock coming from?
Gotcha. Largely right now, that's just coming from across the river. You've got, I think, 3 or 4 different mines in Oregon that are really set up to feed the barging facilities. So that's the majority of where that's coming from. It can also come from upriver a little ways, out in Dallsport. There are 5 or 6 mines. The Yakima tribe, operates a mine that actually has a barge loaded out facility. And there was another site just east of Dell, like literally just east of Dallsport, still on the river, that had plans to build the barge facility, to build a loadout terminal, but the permitting to load out anything into the Columbia is really difficult. It's a decade or so to get a barge facility set up out there. So, a little of it could come downriver, but largely most of it right now is fairly locally sourced. Your barges are not floating a long ways to get into the market. So, and just like trucks, the farther the barge is from where your market is, the more that's going to cost. The longer that rock has to sit on that barge, they're charging you by the river mile or something, but they're definitely a distance charge that is associated with that. So the farther that has to come away, the longer that stuff is on the barge, if it has to get pushed upriver, those will all impact cost. But right now, it's all locally sourced, mostly within like Multnomah County.
Okay. And so we have one aggregate port, which is the Port of Vancouver. I understand they have limited space, but
Mhm.
as terms of feasibility of additional aggregate ports, it sounds like expanding the existing one would be more feasible than trying to create an additional one.
Yeah, it seems like it. And just the space needed for an aggregate port down, within the port district that's already fairly jam packed full of goodness would be pretty difficult. And again, permitting for those things are long and expensive. And so again, all that permitting cost and time then gets turned back and rolled into the aggregate cost that comes out of that port. So if there's one existing that could be expanded, that's going to be a way more economical solution than trying to create a brand new port area and find, the 40, 60, 80 acres that are needed for that.
Right. And with the rail, there would have to be a site as well
Absolutely.
to transport. So the cost with rail would be would also include some trucking, just as it would with the ports.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so your rail will bring it most of the way, from North County down closer into market. The Battleground market would be well served by that one. And then Vancouver could, again, potentially, but just like your barge ports, you don't have any rail offload aggregate facilities. And so there's, that challenge as well, as far as, the time permitting, and then just the space needed for those. Is there a nice 40-acre, 60-acre space adjacent to the rail yard where they could build this thing that they would have to start getting working on essentially now? It
Right.
sounded like those guys were pretty hot to trot to get their rail up and running again. But like I say, in talking with Eric Temple, in as far as timelines go for their project, for their was it the switching yard they want to make out in Shalachi there, he was seeing probably at best 10 years to get just the extraction phase done before they even had the flat ground that they could use to make the rail yard kind of thing. So and that was going to come out at market demand, he said. So in talking with industry folks, I think that was Bo Stortle that I was talking to about that one. Bo was not real impressed with the quality of rock that was there. He's like, a lot of it's unusable. It's not a solid spec rock source. It's a bunch of probably reject rock. It's going to be kind of hard to handle. So it has its own challenges as well. But yeah, setting up
And
the facilities for the
which
load out
rock
and
was
unloading
that? Which rock was that you were referring to that was not very good?
That was actually the rock that they would need to extract for the rail switching yard project. We were looking into that just because of the size and the
Chalachi.
depth of extraction. Per our
Got
law,
it.
would have required a surface mine permit, but under their CFR exemptions, we don't permit them. So they were going to
I
do
just
this project.
you're talking about Chalachi, correct?
Yeah, yes, this is Shalashi
Okay,
area.
good. That's what I was unclear on. And then I was just wondering, given how a shrinking resource, a limited resource, if there's alternative materials that folks are looking at for construction other than actual rock.
Yeah, there's a few. Largely, rock is needed just for its durability, and that's really the challenge with using other materials, is finding something that's durable enough to do this. There's actually a Canadian company years ago, and they still might be doing this, that were actually making these solar-powered glass panels that you could use, that are used for roadway construction. They're like a modular panel with solar panels. It's actually kind of cool. The solar power powers lights and whatnot within the panels. It also keeps the panel above freezing, so it heats itself so the road won't freeze over. And there's this weird little tread type of stuff they put on those so that roadways could be made out of those. I don't know what the costs are. They had to be crazy expensive, but I know different companies are looking into that specifically for this kind of issue where either the aggregate resources that are needed don't exist. They were looking for this up in like Yukon area where you've permafrost area. It's hard to get good rock up there, and then you've got the whole freeze thaw issue. So this solved a lot of those problems. Plus, with the solar panel and the modular system and all the LEDs they have incorporated into them, they can do neat things like, if you've got an accident ahead, your road can actually have a bunch of red X's suddenly appear, something like that, or a bunch of arrows to move you into the other lane, and address kind of real-time traffic issues at the same time. But outside of kind of those weird, like, wow, that sounds really neat in a 2030 we're all on flying cars future universe, I'm not sure we're going to be building glass panel roads anytime soon in the country here at, I'm sure, a very hefty price tag. So the other materials would be like recycled tires are used for sometimes a lightweight fill, and that really has to do with like kind of the environmental area that they're going across. If it's hey, we've got this kind of a bog area that we're having a hard time getting compaction in, maybe we can put this lightweight bridging surface on that is less likely to sink into the bog, that would then support our road or whatnot. Those have very limited usage, and they also have some difficulty with the breakdown of rubber. Is an exothermic process, and when buried, that rubber generally generates enough heat to catch on fire. DOT at 2 of their test facilities had embankment fires start from use of rubber lightweight fill materials. So like I say, very limited use in very specific areas, but generally for roadway surface, you're pretty much stuck with aggregate.
Okay, thanks for that thorough response. And then Is it the intention of the GMA that each county supply its own needs for aggregate? I'm looking around to our attorney as well.
Generally, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's not a violation, but the intent is that, because aggregate is expensive to transport and that localization of mine sites is something that needs to be kind of prioritized. The intent was to make sure that each county had their own supply, so that you didn't have these, larger counties kind of, sucking the supply out of the adjoining smaller county type of thing, or, situations where, one county is just a massive exporter, moving all their gravel into adjoining counties and maybe limiting their future resources by doing so.
Great, great. I don't know that there's any other questions at this time. Thank you so very much for this. It's been very helpful, and
Certainly.
I don't know if we're providing any direction at this moment, but we have another work session to get to.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you all
Have
very
a
much.
great
I really
day.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.